Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to On the House, the Household Management Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Joustra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's begin. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking about how to maximize savings and comfort with home solar with Professor Wasim Saman, who is Emeritus Professor of Sustainable Energy Engineering at University of South Australia. Hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, do you mind introducing yourself in a bit more detail?
Okay. Well, I can tell you my life story in a few minutes if you like.
Sure, sounds great.
I was actually born and raised in Mosul, Iraq. But when I finished school, I had the opportunity to move to the UK, where I did the rest of my studies and did some work there. Afterwards, I also got married in the UK. Afterwards, we decided to go back to Iraq and spent quite a good period there where I really started working on solar energy and energy in buildings. I helped establish the Solar Energy Center in Iraq in the 1980s, and we had a number of buildings which were the first in that region. But in the early 90s, we decided the area was getting too hot in many ways and decided to come to Australia. And we've been in Australia for the last 30-odd years. My main contributions, if you like, in academia is being an academic at the University of South Australia. And I've been very much engaged in teaching, but also in research leading to if you like, concrete outcomes, because I'm an engineer. The main work I've done is helping building developers establish housing developments which are environmentally friendly, comfortable, and energy efficient. And also, I help develop what I call thermal batteries. Maybe later on we can talk about them and how they're different from normal batteries and where they can be used.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah. If you want to know what I do now, I mean, I'm still active in terms of being at the university, but also I spend most of my time mentoring staff and students, not only in this university, but around the world. I advise industry, but also I continuously try to advise government about policy issues on how to move to a more sustainable future. I think that's probably most of what I have. Hopefully that will give you an idea about who I am.
Yes, thank you so much. You certainly have done a lot with your life, moving around, but also seems like you're still, trying to influence us and make Australia and the world more sustainable and energy efficient. So really looking forward to learning more about that. But before we do, we're going to have a section called Have You Met Wasim, where we get to know you through some of your favorite things. First thing I'd like to know is, what is your favorite book?
A book which really impressed me and I think is making a difference in Australia is a book called Rewiring Australia. It was written by a guy called Saul Griffith. He is actually an Australian engineer, but he continued his studies in the United States and got to the stage where he was advising the White House on energy and environmental issues, and developed a program he called Rewiring America before he decided to come back to Australia and spread the message here. It's extremely convincing and effective in terms of him describing how if we move to using electricity and using the sun and the wind to rely on our electricity, including rooftop electricity, not only do we save money, but we also we have comfortable homes. The national economy improves, and finally we save a lot of the emissions associated with all the coal and the oil and other appliances that we use.
Sounds exactly what we should be doing. Would you recommend this book for, the casual reader?
It's not very technical, and that's why I thought I'd mention it. It's there, and certainly what I like about Saul Griffith is the fact that he knows how to communicate his message certainly a lot better than I do.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm so far, I think our conversation's been very good, but I guess we'll see how complex it gets a bit later. But thank you for sharing that. And have you watched any movies recently that you've enjoyed?
Again, we watch a lot of movies at home, but a movie that I saw probably a couple of years ago was produced and made by David Attenborough. I don't know if you've come across David Attenborough. He's certainly a world leader in environmental behavior. He spent all his life chasing animals and birds and fish, and he'd been around the whole world. And he's actually in his late 90s. Not many people know that. And recently, a couple of years ago, he produced a movie called Alive on Our Planet, in which not only he shows how much damage we've done to the planet, but also I admire his optimism and the way he thinks it's not too late to be able to redress what we have managed to destroy. And he believes in the ingenuity and capabilities of humans to enable us to get over damaging the environment, particularly climate change and the issues associated with that. And certainly, again, he offers detailed solutions for the world to go along. And I don't know if you noticed, but David Attenborough still, even now, goes to conferences and talks to world leaders and tells them what they need to do to save the earth, which I really admire.
Yeah, I grew up watching his documentaries, and it's so amazing that, he's been around for so long that I guess he's been able to see the effect that humans have had on the planet, and is now using his platform and his voice to, try and improve things, and still going as well in his 90s. It's amazing.
I think he's 98, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow.
Something like that. And he's still going.
Amazing. I can't imagine, that I'd want to be doing anything when I'm 98.
Okay.
And do you listen to any podcasts?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but the podcasts that have been, if you like, accompanying me for a long time is what I listen to before we go to bed at night. And these are maybe podcasts that remind me of my youth. I listen to comedy BBC podcasts, particularly sitcoms, and I'm sure you're too young to have seen things like, what am I thinking about? Not in front of the children and Dad's Army and lots of quite old, very, funny sitcoms. Every night they send me to sleep and my wife.
I've watched a bit of Dad's Army, and I've watched a couple others sitcoms as I was growing up. Are there any like particular podcast sitcoms that you'd recommend? Because I don't really know any.
Yeah, I'm talking about the BBC. I'm just trying to think of the old British comedies. There's a new one called, what is it called? There's Yes Minister, which is quite old. There's Steptoe and Son, which is quite old. There is, I'm sorry, I listened to most of these old ones. There's The Navy Lark. If you just get the BBC app and look for comedy and sitcoms, and you have a long list and you can choose. And I don't know, I thought I've been used to having this way as a nice way of going to sleep, basically.
That makes sense that, you wouldn't necessarily be looking at the name of the podcast when you're about to go to sleep or about to fall asleep.
And they always have something new. They have such a big catalog. They always have
Okay.
stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's great as well because, a lot of people have trouble sleeping, and maybe something like this, it's light enough that, you're happy to fall asleep to it.
Exactly, because if there's something with a complicated plot, maybe it's too hard to, start thinking rather than dozing off.
Yeah, I've made that mistake before.
Yeah.
And do you have a role model?
Yes, I guess so. It may be fortuitous, but my PhD supervisor back in Leeds University in the UK is a prominent engineer called Duncan Dowson. I obviously learned a lot of how to work as an academic from him. And at this stage in my life, I certainly learn a lot from him as a role model. He actually died a couple of years ago at the age of 91. But until the year he died, he was still quite active in providing leadership, in supervising students, in writing, in making his views known, and in providing a lot of mentorship to a lot of people. And certainly I see this as a way forward for my life.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're already, following in his footsteps.
I'm trying, but I don't think I'll get there. I think he was a lot better than I am.
I'm sure he probably had a mentor and he probably thought the same as well. And there's probably someone that you're mentoring who is probably thinking the same, I'll never be quite as good as you. And I'm sure you're all doing really well.
Thank you. Well, I certainly spend a lot of my time talking to my ex-students around the world, but at the university and other places. And I already have some who are professors and they have other certainly significant positions. And I'm very proud of them, and I certainly try and help them whenever I can.
Sounds like you're doing an excellent job.
I'm not sure about that. I can always do more.
And have you completed any courses that have inspired you?
Obviously, I read a lot. I see a lot of particularly online conferences and courses regarding the area of climate change and sustainable energy. I think what I still find quite inspiring is actually going to a local or even better, an international conference face to face. I get a lot of energy out of that. When I come back, I feel very energized to continue doing a lot of work, and I get a lot of good ideas. They're conferences rather than courses, but they just show how much development there is and give ideas and inspiration.
So, and often, I feel like conferences are only open to professionals in the field. Are these conferences, open to, maybe your general person who's not involved or is not an academic?
Well, there are lots of types of conferences and meetings. There are industry conferences, there are academic conferences, there are academic conferences which focus on students doing research, but also there is plenty of public events which are intended for the general public to learn about, well, the topic I'm interested in. And I try and do my best to continuously contribute to that I get a lot of invitations to give talks and be engaged with the community groups, talking about specific area of energy and the environment. And certainly, I think what will make us move ahead in terms of combating climate change is the general community, not the politicians by themselves or the scientists by themselves. It needs the whole community moving forward, and they need to understand and make their mind up immediately themselves after they've heard the details and the facts. And certainly, I see one of my roles is disseminating the knowledge that I've gathered or I keep trying to learn.
Great, thank you. Yes, because I'm wondering if, just the general public can go to some of these conferences, and it sounds like we can, so that's great. And
if you do some searching, you'll find lots of webinars and face-to-face events all around the world, literally, and there's certainly plenty of them. And certainly post-COVID, there are so many webinars, and I know sometimes living in Australia, it means that we are awake in the middle of the night to hear something or participate in something. But certainly you can have access to them, and there are lots of free ones as well, not necessarily having to pay for.
Sounds great. I think that I don't always realize that I can do these things. So it's, thank you for letting me know. So we're going to move on to our topic today, which is maximizing savings and comfort with home solar. But before I do get started with that, I'd like to, make sure we've got a few definitions down so that we know exactly what we're talking about and people aren't too lost. So the first thing I'd like to know is, how do you define household management?
I guess to me, well, first of all, let me say I'm a very bad person at managing the house. I only manage the garden. My wife manages the house. Having said that, my understanding of management is doing the tasks necessary to ensure the physical, mental, and financial well-being of the family, of the household. And this involves a lot of tasks, a lot of activities. My angle in terms of household management is making sure that we do this to make sure that part of our well-being needs to include being comfortable in the home. And that means we have to be thermally comfortable, among other things. And we can do that needing energy, but all the activities we need to do to ensure our well-being needs to be made in a sustainable fashion, and keeping in mind that not only we're not damaging the environment, but we're leaving the right legacy for our children and grandchildren. And this is what I think I add to the management. I'd like to call it sustainable management.
Yes. Okay, so I'm very excited to dive a bit more into this. But first, I'd like to know, you mentioned thermal comfort. Is that just, feeling warm Do you mind defining that, I guess, in a bit more detail?
It's feeling that the conditions in terms of temperature, you could be feeling too hot or too warm, but you can be comfortable. But also, it's more than the temperature. There are many factors that influence our physical comfort, including, apart from temperature, the level of moisture in the air, the speed of the air. We've all felt drafts or sometimes felt there's no movement. Also, often we feel the humidity is too high, even though the temperature is good, so it has to be within reason. Also, the surroundings need to be at the right environment and temperature. So even if we have a comfortable room, but if we have one window which is bringing a lot of glare and a lot of heat, that will not be causing us thermal comfort. So it's all these physical properties of our surroundings that will, we can actually measure this. It's not, it's quite complicated, but it's all the combination of all these factors that we need, obviously, to make sure we get set correctly to ensure our thermal comfort.
Mm-hmm. And then you're also looking at not just how can we maintain this, but how can we maintain this in a sustainable way? Because I'm guessing that, if our house is cold, we can turn the heater up really high, but that's not going to be very sustainable.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
And some people, I'll give you an example. I deal with a lot of households, and some people think that just getting a small electric heater and turning it on may be good for the environment, but it could be the worst possible thing they do for the environment, because these resistance type heaters, which are small and quite cheap, use 3 times as much energy as a reverse cycle air conditioner, for example.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's actually a really great point. So, if we're, trying to make our home more sustainable, whilst also, keeping it comfortable, what are maybe some pitfalls that people fall into, and what are some ways that we can manage it more sustainably?
That's a very good question. And it depends on what stage we are in occupying our house or our dwelling. If we are planning to build or renovate the house, we build a new house or renovate our existing home, we certainly need to think of making the house more energy efficient. And this includes lots of things, including having the correct level of insulation, making sure that the windows are placed so that they don't allow direct sun in summer, and hopefully bring us as much sun as possible during winter, making sure that we have the correct shading devices, making sure that we use our plants and trees so that there are lots of deciduous plants that we can use so that they provide us shading in summer, but then in winter they lose their leaves and we can get the sun through into our home. There are lots of other things that we can do in designing. The actual orientation of the home, making sure that we are facing the sun during midday. So in the southern hemisphere, we need to face north, and in the northern hemisphere, we need to be facing south for most of our windows, because they're the best orientation, which brings in the sun during winter and can easily be shaded from the sun during the summer. Having done all this, then obviously we come to the appliances. We need to use energy efficient appliances. And in Australia, as well as the rest of the world, there are ways of telling us the energy efficiency of the appliance when we buy the appliance. And we can see how much money we can save in running it, even if it means we pay a little more when we're buying it. And this goes to anything from cooking to the two main uses of energy in the home are heating and cooling, which And certainly there's a lot of difference in some of the appliances used for heating and cooling, and we can save a lot using the correct appliances. But also in water heating, hot water, we use about 25 to 35% of our energy in heating water for use domestically. And again, the current thinking is to use so-called heat pump hot water systems. They are relatively new, but they use electricity. And if we have our own solar system, we can program them so that when there is excess solar energy being generated from our roof, we can just get the excess energy to heat our water, and we get it for free. We get the hot water for free. I think I can say a lot more about this, but I think I'll stop here, and maybe we can highlight a few other things as we continue talking.
Yes, you brought up a good point. I'd like to talk a bit more about solar panels. But actually, first of all, before we dive into that, I have a not a weird question about solar panels, but so you're saying that, we can use the sun to heat up the water. Now, presumably that would be, probably midday or the, mid-morning, afternoon when the sun is at its brightest is when we'd have that extra energy. I personally am at work at that time. So if I want my, hot morning shower before I go to work, is it still going to be hot from from the day before? Or are we going to have a shower, maybe straight after we come home from work?
No, I don't think, my view on this is that if we are serious about moving to sustainable living, we can't expect everyone to change their lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So if you want your shower in the morning, you must have it in the morning. The water that you will heat during the day will stay hot during the night, and you can use it in the morning. Of course, if there are too many of you for the size of the water tank, maybe there'll be issues, but if there are 2 or 3 people in the house rather than 5 or 6, it shouldn't be any problem. And of course, we can select the right size water heater to help us do that. And many of them can store a lot of hot water overnight without any issues.
Okay, that solves the question because, I was wondering, would the water cool off by the evening and then,
No.
Okay,
No.
interesting.
If it's slightly, for example, if we've had a cloudy or a rainy day the day before, there's always a standby system that will bring it up to the right temperature. So you wouldn't need to worry about having a cold shower in the morning.
Particularly if you're person number 5 having your shower every day.
Exactly.
So and I'd like to talk more about solar panels. So as you were saying before, this is probably one of those things that, if you're building or renovating that you would want to, put into your house, maybe not necessarily something that you would do as a renter. So I guess, how do you go about, as a homeowner, deciding if your house is suitable for solar panels and if you should get them, if it's worth it?
Well, let me start by giving you a few statistics. In Australia, a third of our homes now have solar panels. And in South Australia, where I live, more than half the roofs have solar panels. And in South Australia, very often we can just use our rooftop solar to run the whole state, to provide the electricity for the whole state. But also we have larger solar farms and wind farms to make this happen. And in South Australia, we use solar and wind to now, I think we are up to about 80% of our requirements for electricity come from solar and wind. And with rooftop solar being quite a serious contributor to that. So solar energy has proven to be the most economical method of generating energy or getting energy. Most Australian roofs are suitable to have solar. We just need to choose probably I can say without hesitation that if you live in a single or a double-story home, we have enough roof area to install a solar system. Obviously, it gets harder in a multi-story apartment building. You have to have extra area from somewhere else to feed the electricity. The trends nowadays is that a lot of people are covering most of their roofs with solar. In the past, when solar panels were expensive, when I put my solar system 12, 13 years ago, I put a small number of panels, and luckily we live in quite an energy efficient home, and we don't need more than that. But nowadays, people use electricity for everything, and they're not exactly worried about turning everything off when they don't need it. But also, it's an attractive proposition to generate more than you need because you can feed it to the grid. So the typical installation in Australia at the moment is 10 kilowatt hours of 10 kilowatt peak solar systems, which often can be accommodated on a typical Australian home. The economics of that are extremely good. Normally, in most Australian locations, we get our money back within 2 or 3 years. And after that, we get a lot of free energy from the sun. The other good thing about solar energy and solar panels is that if you look at a solar panel, it's encapsulated by glass. It doesn't have any moving parts. And a lot of them come with a warranty of 20 years or so. So there's not much that can go wrong with them, and we can rely on them to continue giving us power for certainly 20 years or more. There are many panels which were installed 30 years ago which are still working with maybe a 5% reduction in performance, but nothing serious in terms of the reduction in performance. And they are the main part of the solar system. I guess the other parts, which are the controllers, if you like, and there's usually a box which we install called the inverter, often can go wrong after 5 to 10 years and needs replacing. And that is the box where we convert the electricity to the current that we use in our home, the voltage and the current, from direct current to alternating current, and at the right voltage and at the right properties. Also, this box facilitates our interaction with the electricity grid, where when we have too much electricity generated by the panels, we export our electricity to the grid. And when we don't have enough, we import the electricity from the grid. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
You've answered my question. I think you've answered several other questions that I had. So you also mentioned before thermal batteries. So I'm guessing that instead of maybe selling it on to the energy companies, we can also store some of our own energy?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I have a couple of clarifications on batteries. First of all, currently there are many organizations which are selling batteries to people with solar systems or offering a package with solar panels plus a battery. And this is quite useful. There are lots of home batteries being installed which are working very well. The idea is that, as you said earlier, we're not at home during the day, so we store some of the electricity to use in the evening when we come home and we need to do some cooking and some TV watching or entertainment or heating and cooling and so on. And batteries are important, but I believe even now, unless if we want to do them because we're careful about the environment, they're still less economical than solar panels. One other option being developed is having what is called virtual power plants, where organizations or energy providers install batteries in people's homes, but they don't charge as much as the full price for them. But there's a big proviso there. The energy companies can control when the batteries store the energy, and they can also take the energy away to feed the grid when they need it. So this reduces our freedom to use them, but again, by and large, it's very useful and economically it's attractive. To me, the solution to energy storage in terms of electricity will come when most of us have electric vehicles. You may be surprised to hear that, but the typical battery available in the vehicles right now available in the market is 10 to 15 to even 20 times the size of the batteries we put in our homes. So the big battery in the car, not only as it is now being available to be charged by the excess solar that we generate in our rooftops, but the technology is now available and moving ahead very quickly so that some of the electricity available in our car batteries can be used to feed our home when we're not generating enough, particularly in the evening at nighttime. And I think there's enough, if you like, smart controls to enable this to happen automatically without us even knowing about it. So when there's excess power, our car can be used as a large storage facility, but also when we need excess energy, we can use some of the energy in our car to a certain limit to make sure that we can still go to work the next morning and do whatever business we do, but also to feed us the electricity we need during the evening and nighttime.
And what about thermal batteries? And then you can talk about how it's an innovation. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thermal batteries are devices that store heat at the desired temperature. So we talked about the hot water tank storing heat at the temperature we need to shower or have a bath or wash. We can also use thermal batteries to store energy for heating. So we have some means of storing energy at 40 or 50 degrees Celsius so that when we need the heat, we can turn the stored heat at 50 degrees to heat our home. We can also store cooling at maybe 7 or 8 degrees Celsius so that when there's excess electricity, we can run our air conditioning system to generate the cooling and store it at 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. And then this will be there waiting for us to use, or we come home and in the evening where there's no sunshine and just turn it on and get the cooling without a lot of extra electricity for running our air conditioning. So thermal batteries can be used at any temperature from below zero to actually several hundred degrees, which we can use in large solar thermal plants where we generate concentrated heat at 500 or 600 degrees Celsius and then store it in salts and then use it as a storage. When the sun is not shining, we can store that for several hours and certainly overnight to generate the electricity on a large scale. But my interest in thermal batteries has been in using this technology for buildings, for heating and cooling in particular, but also I've done a lot of work on making it possible to use it for large high temperature storage with centralized solar thermal power plants. Let's concentrate on the home. The idea is to have a small box which is full of a salt that melts and freezes at the right temperature. And as you know, you need to add a lot of heat for ice to melt, and it gives you a lot of heat when it dissolves, when it solidifies. So we can use a small size, a small volume to store a lot of heat at the desired temperature using the correct combination of salts, and have this box ready for providing us with heating and cooling as needed. The cost of running a thermal battery is many times less than the cost of running an ordinary battery, and we are already using this technology in larger buildings. We've got a number of applications in a number of Australian buildings around Australia, and they're working very well, and people want more and more of them. And we hope our initial focus to be the larger buildings, but then my work on this started with a focus on housing, and I'm still hoping that we will have these available for smaller houses to store the heating and the cooling we need in our homes.
I mean, it might be too hard for you to predict, but do you think it's going to be a possibility in 10 years or 20 years or 50
No,
years?
it's less than that. It's
okay.
For buildings, for larger buildings, it's already happening. And the industry partner I'm working with is now looking at having a large plant for producing these thermal batteries in their thousands to use in buildings, including housing, and to use around the world. So I'm quite optimistic that certainly within 5 years, there will be a lot of them around.
Okay, great. And would you be able to install them into maybe buildings that already exist, even in particular older buildings, or is this more for new builds?
Definitely. In fact, one of our current really attractive markets is some of the larger buildings where the building managers are trying to avoid using gas for heating. So we're replacing a gas heater with a thermal battery, which uses electricity with a normal reverse cycle system to store the heat when there's cheap electricity or electricity from the sun, and we store that heat to use. It's also a good way of enlarging the size of your cooling or heating capacity, because if you suddenly need more cooling or heating, instead of getting a new additional heating or cooling system, you use the same system and get a thermal battery to use the existing heating and cooling system to charge our thermal battery when there is plenty of electricity cheaply. Mm-hmm. And then we can add that. And a good example, we have one here in the university where suddenly people go into a lecture theatre and need additional cooling. We just turn on the thermal battery to give them this quick charge of cooling instead of waiting for the conventional cooling system to chug along and cool the actual theatre. Well, there are plenty of applications, particularly for existing buildings.
And I don't know much about South Australia, but I know that Melbourne is very famous for the 4 seasons in a day. And so I'm not sure if I'm just understanding this incorrectly, but it seems like, you either store heating or cooling. So what happens if, in Melbourne, you start off and it's going to be 40 degrees and you prepare and you store cool in it, or I guess coldness. Not sure how to say that, but
sometimes we say cool. So I'm not sure if that's the right
cool.
Yeah.
And then, but then, suddenly it drops 20 degrees or possibly more, and you don't need it, or you even want it to be a bit warm. Is it able to adapt quickly to those changes in temperature or our requirements?
I think the air conditioning technology including or incorporating thermal batteries is capable of responding to the demands as the weather changes. If we talk about individual homes, I'd like to think that what I call the thermal mass of the home and its content would be able to help us combat the sudden variations in temperature, but also a thermal battery can be used. And actually, modern reverse cycle air conditioning systems, which are not the ducted ones, but the more modern ones, the split systems, as we call them, even now are capable of heating one room while cooling the other room at the same time. There's no problem
Ah.
with doing that nowadays.
Okay, great. Because, yeah, sometimes, we'll start off the day very hot or very cold, and then it'll change suddenly and we'll need
Yes.
the opposite.
Yes, I've lived in Melbourne.
Yeah. Maybe not a problem for other places, but certainly in Melbourne. So thank you for explaining what thermal batteries are, because, yeah, I didn't know much about them and I had lots of questions. And I do also have some questions, I guess, more involved in the installation and like the costs and things. So you did already mention that a lot of people will, make back the cost of the solar panels, in a few years, which is really great to know. But, you still have to have that money up front. How much is the average cost of a solar panel system?
Yeah, typically the cost is several $1,000s, but there are many schemes available for householders where companies can go and offer to install a system on a roof for nothing, and then they get the money back through savings of electricity bills. But certainly the cost is not prohibitive, particularly in many countries, including Australia, where we get government inducements to help with the initial cost. And this is paid when you are looking at installing a system. And this is why it's become quite, economically and financially and also helping the environment, it's become quite normal to see many housing developments with lots and lots of solar panels, especially the new ones. Also, we talked about the maintenance. As I said, the life of the panels, which are the major components, is certainly 20 to 30 years. Having said that, some people get carried away by installing panels where trees can shade the roof, and that's not a very useful thing. If they do that, the technology is available so that only the areas being shaded are not generating electricity when they are shaded, but the typical systems are divided into a number of segments, and the whole segment stops operating when a small part of it is shaded. So this is something that needs attention when looking at installing a system. In terms of maintenance, I think it's necessary. Most systems now come with an app where you can see it on your phone to see how much you're generating. And some people are making a hobby of competing with each other to see how much they've been generating over the last month or the last week and comparing notes when they meet. Having said that, we have some cases where something goes wrong with the electronics and we suddenly don't get any electricity. And the best way of finding out if this is happening, if we're not used to looking at the app every now and again, is to look at our electricity bill when we get the bill. If it says there's no income being generated from solar electricity, we know that something has gone wrong, and obviously it needs replacement, or it needs attention from a specialized technician. The only other thing that's probably worth mentioning here is that a lot of people ask, should I be cleaning my panels regularly? My answer to that, in most parts of the world, if it's raining every now and again, not necessarily every week, but even every month, this may well be sufficient to clean our panels. But if we go through periods of several months with a lot of dust, it will certainly improve our electricity generation if we get them cleaned properly, just to avoid the film of dust actually staying on them.
You also mentioned trees, shading part of the solar panels. I know that people have to get their roofs and, gutters cleaned every once in a while. Would you recommend the same if you're near some trees, just to make sure there are no leaves or other debris on the solar panels?
It's not likely that the leaves will stay on the panels. They'll be blown away in a few hours, if not minutes. But it's important that, we don't want to cut trees to put panels, but at the same time, there are sophisticated ways of choosing the best area of the roof to put the panels. And this could be done just through Google Maps and these sort of applications. And it can be done professionally by someone without even going to the home. So when someone is looking to install a system, all they need to do is to give their address and they'll get, there are software systems that will enable that to be done to make sure that you get the best performance out of them. In the past, we used to say only put the solar panels to face, in the orientation to face the sun. I think this idea has now become irrelevant because solar systems are so cheap and most people are putting lots of panels on most of their roof, as long as there's no shading.
Okay. I guess it made sense, if you could only have a few, we'd want it to get the most sunlight. But if you can afford to have the whole roof done, why not?
Yeah.
And I guess, so it sounds like, when you're trying to pick the right solar system, is it more of a professional who's going to take a look at it and it's not really up to us to decide?
I think at the end of the day, there'll be, it's useful to get professional advice. There are some sources where we can get advice, and certainly it's not a bad idea to get independent professional advice, but also if that's not available, to get a number of quotes and comparing them. First of all, knowing what we want, whether we want a large system or a small system and what size system, and this is determined, of course, by the size of our roof, but also by the amount of electricity we want to generate, which is then, based on how much we need. But if we can't get independent professional advice, it's useful to get at least a number of quotes and comparing the issues. In terms of quality, a lot of people talk a lot about these are better quality than others. My view on that, and maybe I'm different from others, is that the Australian standards are very strict. And if the system passes the Australian standards, it must be good enough to be installed. But the quality maybe is reflected by the warranty period that we get. So obviously getting the long warranty period is important. Obviously having a reasonably well-known company is important, rather than someone who might be closing down in 2 or 3 years. I think these are the main issues that we need to think about And there's no reason. Let me just give you an example of how the Australian standards have proven to be good. We've had many parts of Australia where we had very large hailstones falling on roofs and damaging roofs. I don't know if you've come across these, but we've had many areas in Australia doing that. The only parts of the roof that normally haven't really suffered have been the solar panels. The rest of the roof can get damaged, but the solar panels, by and large, remained in one piece and didn't need replacing. And certainly that happened to my home. We had to get the roofing, the metal roofing replaced, but the solar panels had to be taken off and brought back in as they were because of hailstorms. So we don't need to be hung up on this is made in such and such a country, or if it passes Australian standard, it must be good enough, especially if it's also enforced by a good warranty period.
Okay. But you also mentioned things like how light the solar panels are. So I'm guessing different types of roofs maybe need different systems. Do you mind running through, how you would pick one solar system from another solar system, depending on your roof type?
I think most modern solar panels are light enough to be installed on most roofs nowadays.
Okay.
The only thing that can be a differentiating factor is the level of efficiency of these systems. You may be surprised to hear that the best solar systems are only 22, 23% efficient. In other words, they only convert 20% of the total solar energy they receive into electricity. It's not very high, but this is the laws of physics. But if we have a large roof, we may be able to get away with less efficient systems, maybe 18% or 17% rather than 21 or 22 or 23%. That could be a point of differentiation. There's also another type of solar panels which are even cheaper, but a lot less efficient. And then we need to have much larger areas to produce the same amount of electricity. And maybe they're not the ideal solution to a lot of the homes that we are dealing with.
Okay. So in that case, I guess things to look out for are how much energy you use, how big your roof is, and then just see if the solar panels you're going to have enough solar panels and whether it's worth getting the more efficient or the less efficient ones.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss before we move on to our next section?
I think we've covered most things. The only thing maybe I need to emphasize is that I believe in trying to live a life of sustainable living where we use energy and other resources efficiently before we rely on solar panels to give us the energy we need. So we need to minimize the amount of energy use through not only house design, but of the way we use energy. It's people that use energy, not the home that uses energy. And we need to think of a lifestyle where we need to think about how to get the best of our home, but also the best of our renewable energy that we're using. I'll give you an example. During hot periods of the year, we all go through, well, right around the world, in Europe last summer and in this country now, several periods are going through heat waves and we're having bushfires, but also we need a lot of extra cooling. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we have the right space that we can live in to avoid cooling the whole home for no reason. So we need to think about where we can have a space where there's not a lot of direct sunlight and where we can be comfortable with the minimum amount of cooling necessary and turn off the rest of the cooling in the rest of the home because we don't really need it and we don't want to waste the energy. I'm sure even if we're generating a lot of electricity on our panels, there'll be other homes that don't have solar that can utilize our energy. And that means less coal and less oil and less gas being used to run our electricity system.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a few questions based on that. The first thing is, so how do we, reduce the requirement? Like, how do we reduce the amount of energy that we need to cool the place? So you mentioned having a cool, dark space. Would you recommend maybe gathering the family into one room that maybe doesn't have as much direct light and letting the rest of the house heat up?
I'm not saying we need to all sit around and close to each other and not do our own thing. In reality, we'll all be doing our own thing. But if we have a choice, a lot of homes have got more than one room where we can stay or sit or even sit and watch a screen or whatever. And when we make these choices, we need to think of the cooler part of the home during heat and vice versa. In winter, we need to chase the sunshine. It's a lot nicer to be in the sun and having natural lighting. But certainly, I'm not calling for sitting in a dark room. But certainly, things like putting our blinds, making sure that we don't get direct sunlight will reduce the amount of cooling we need. Also, turning up our thermostat. Some people think you get better cooling if you turn down the thermostat and really feel cold. I think we don't need that. We need to be comfortable, as we said earlier. So putting our thermostat on the maximum possible without feeling uncomfortable is what we need to do. And this way we can save energy and save the environment at the same time, but certainly without jeopardizing our comfort.
Okay. Because in my apartment, we have beautiful big windows. And because it's been getting hotter, I've been putting down the curtains. And it does feel a bit of a shame to not have the lovely sunlight, but it does then get too hot. And then, as you said before, my partner then turns the air conditioner on at 18 degrees. And I'm sitting there shivering, thinking, I don't actually need it to be this cold.
Yeah. Well,
So, mm-hmm.
Well, certainly in Australia, we have wearing the right clothing is also important. And certainly we don't need to put a jacket on to go to work during the middle of summer if it's hot.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those recommendations. Do you have any more recommendations to, help us to be more sustainable?
Oh, well, I already mentioned using the deciduous trees, for example, to create shade. I know it takes a bit of patience to have the trees grow big enough, but certainly the result is really good because then we can be shaded during summer and get direct sunlight during winter, particularly in areas facing west, where it's difficult to control the low sun during summer when it comes round to the west side. In terms of sustainable living, certainly I have a lot of methods of doing that. Certainly as a person, I'd like to think that I do the least damage to the environment if I can help it, but then I feel quite guilty when I take a flight to another state or another country. But this is unavoidable, and I think there will be other solutions in the future. But in our own home, I certainly enjoy gardening, and I don't have a big garden, but I enjoy spending a few minutes every day in the garden. I find it the most way the easiest way of relaxing. And at the end of the day, our garden has a number of fruit trees. And this time of the year, for example, at the moment, we get figs and nectarines and plums. And we had cherries previously, and hopefully we'll have some apples in the future. I also have a small vegetable area where we get tomatoes and cucumbers and other salad materials and other daily vegetables. When we need them, we just go and pick them and use them.
Sounds amazing.
And that certainly is quite convenient once you do the initial start, but also it's fresh, it's tasty, and it saves you money and it saves the environment. A lot of not only the farmers producing the vegetables, but the food miles bringing the food from many parts of the world and many parts of Australia. Another thing that I do, which I find very useful, particularly for my garden, is having a worm farm. And a worm farm maybe is a strange thing to many people, but it's just a small box with a number of layers where we put all our food waste, whether it's peels or other vegetable products or any leftovers. We don't have a lot of leftovers, but we try and use them in various ways. And it just needs the start with some worms that will eat all this waste and produce both a solid and a liquid component, and both of which are particularly invigorating for the garden. So whenever I need to feed my garden, I put in a little bit of the liquid and then add water to it and just water various plants, and they really enjoy it. But also the solid amount that comes out, it's like compost, and you can put it anywhere. And again, it has a lot of living organisms that really regenerate the garden.
I love this.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I love this sort of circular system you have where you grow the food, you eat the food, you have any waste, and then it goes to the worms. The worms eat that, and then it goes back to the garden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And everyone's happy.
Yes. The plants are happy, the worms are happy, and you're happy.
Yes. And let me just say, we do a lot of traveling as a household. And I've left the worm farm for up to 3 months in the garage. And the worms are still there, and they're still waiting to be fed when you come back. It doesn't smell. It doesn't need any much attention, apart from whenever our little food waste container gets full, we empty it in that and cover it with a piece of newspaper. That's all it needs.
Sounds like the perfect kind of pet for me. You can leave it for up to 3 months at a time.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I've been looking forward to making my own worm farm. One day I'll do it.
Yeah, I certainly encourage you to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing your worm farm and your little circular garden, and also, how to keep our homes comfortable in summer and in winter without, having too high an energy bill, and, maybe considering getting some solar panels. If our listeners want to find out more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Well, I have a personal website at the University of South Australia, so all they need to do is to search under my name, Wasim Saman. Also, I'm quite happy to respond to emails if there are specific requests. And I don't know if my email address will be available, but I can say it's wasim.saman@unisa.edu.au.
Great, thank you. We'll make sure both your email address and the website are in the show notes. So if people do want to contact you, they can find you there.
Yes, that'll be great.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. I didn't realize we've already spent an hour and a half or more talking.
Yes. I mean, it's been so interesting, and I hope our listeners have also enjoyed it. Yes.
I think so too.
Yeah, thank you. You've been listening to On the House, produced by the Household Management Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at hm.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Joustra. Thanks for tuning in.